So the concept we want to talk about today is FIN number. Have you ever heard that term before? No? Do you know what your SIN number is? Do you know it off by heart? Yeah, I think a lot of people do. So your social insurance number, we know it off by heart, but financially, what does it really do for us? Not a whole lot. Really, what it does is it tells the government who we are, how much we make, and therefore how much they get. So your FIN number stands for your financial independence number. It's the amount of money that you need to accumulate between now and whatever age you want to retire so you'll be okay in retirement. So let's look at an example here is let's say we had a 30-year-old that was making $30,000 a year and they decide that they want to retire when they're 65. So they're looking 35 years old. And one of the biggest challenges we face is by the time we go to retire, are things going to cost more or will they cost less? They always cost more. And why is that? It's because of a nasty little thing called inflation. And if you were to look at the long-term track records on inflation in Canada, you'd see that they work out to about 4%. So what that actually means for this person is that by the time they're 65, they would need to have an income of about $120,000 to provide the same standard of living that 30,000 provides today. Does that seem like a pretty big jump? It is a pretty big jump. But I always tell people, if you were to backtrack into the past, maybe 50, 60 years, and told your grandparents or your great grandparents that you were going to be making, call it 50, 60, maybe $80,000 a year, they'd have thought you were crazy because they hadn't really made that much money in their entire life. So there's a good chance that it's going to happen. Inflation's a little bit lower than that right now, and hopefully it does stay lower, but it's always better to play on the safe side and make sure you have more than enough than not enough. So really what this person would need then, by the time they go to retire, if they had about $1.2 million built up, sitting in some sort of an investment that could generate a 10% rate of return per year, that way they could just pull off the growth every year and pay themselves a pension of $120,000. And that's, maybe a little bit simplistic because when we look at this, the reality is that when we go to retire, we're probably not going to be in that type of an investment that's a little bit aggressive. And the other side of it is, as we've factored in inflation here up until retirement, but unfortunately, inflation doesn't stop the day we retire. But of course, once we plug this all into our computer programs, it figures that all out as long as you understand the concept. So if we help this person figure out that they're going to need $1.2 million built up, the next challenge is how do we get there? Okay, so we could look at investing in a few different areas. So 4%, 8%, 12%. So if we were to look at 4%, at one time you used to be able to get that in a GIC, but really what we're looking at is a more conservative type investment. So for this person to reach that target, they'd have to be putting away about $1,300 a month, every month for the next 35 years to be able to grow that $1.2 million. Now, what do you think the chances are that this person is going to be able to do that? Not likely, right? You consider 30 grand after taxes, they barely have 1,300 left over. So it's probably not going to happen. So they have to look at going up a little bit. So let's say they were in something that was going to get them about 8%. That number would now become about 700 a month. Okay, would that be doable now? It might be still pretty tough, right? So if we look at the 12%, that number comes down to between 200 and 300 a month. And I'm a big believer that if people knew that that was the difference between retiring or not retiring, they could probably find a way to scratch together that kind of money. But the reality is at 12%, it does exist out there, but it's pretty volatile. And therefore, most people realistically, they can't really handle the ups and downs. So they probably need to scale it back and look at investing in the 8% area, which is kind of an area where it's fairly safe, looking at more conservative type mutual fund seg funds that can do that long term. Okay, so for this person, that's the challenge now is maybe 700 a month. But we don't stop there. A lot of financial institutions won't even take you this far. We go a step further and we look at this and say, okay, This 1.2 million target was based on an earned income today. And that earned income we pay tax on. So this 1.2 million, that would be just like if they grew it in an RRSP, because now when they start drawing off, that's going to be taxed like regular income. So we can start looking at those other areas that we might have talked about before. So if we were to look at the non-registered and look at a capital gains environment where it's taxed differently, you'd only have to build $1 million right on the nose, because now they're not going to lose as much to taxation when they start drawing it out. And then if we were to look at the TFSA and the insured tax shelter, that number comes down again to about 800,000, because when we go to draw money out of there, as long as we do it properly, there's ways to get that money out more tax effectively, and sometimes even tax free. So when we look at those areas, just by changing the tax environment, the number that this person has to put away could probably get it down to about 500 a month. Getting a little bit closer, isn't it? So then the next thing that we look at is we say, okay, let's look at their cash flow. And again, when we look at that, someone's monthly cash flow, they have their living expenses, they've got some debt that they're paying for, they've got quite a bit of tax that they're paying, and again, they have that little sliver left over to save. And so again, part of the challenge here is that a lot of financial companies, they want to attack the living expense side and change their lifestyle. But for a lot of people, that's not really feasible, because we have a lot of fixed expenses, our utility bills, those sorts of things that we can't really change a whole lot. So unless we're going to change our lifestyle, it's not going to work very well. So what we look at is, let's target the debt side and the tax side first. Because if we can free up some money in these areas, for money that was already going out the door, but reposition it and free it up to put away towards retirement, now all of a sudden we can put this person in a position where the actual money that they have to come up with out of their pocket, we can now get that down to about $200 to $300 a month. But now they're saving in an area where it's a lot safer. They're not going to have a ton of volatility, and they can sleep at night knowing that they're going to get a steady return, have a good chance of getting to where they want to go. So that's really what we do, is we help people figure out their own specific FIN number, so they have a target and they know what they need to shoot for, and then we help them find the different strategies to help them get there. So is that something that you would want to learn for yourself and help you figure out what your individual FIN number is? If so, it's just a matter of taking some details about your situation and going back and crunching some numbers for you. All right, that sounds good.